I was about to go home after performing an hours-long surgery on a pregnant patient with an amniotic infection. Then suddenly, an ambulance brought in two car crash victims in urgent need of care. When the ambulance doors opened, I could never have imagined that the male patient was my husband, and the female patient was his pregnant mistress. I froze for 3 seconds before carrying out a plan that would shock my husband when he found out who the father of his mistress's baby really was. My name is Michelle, 35 years old, and I had just stepped out of the operating room after a 6-hour surgery, both legs numb as if I had just run a marathon, the collar of my blouse still damp with cold sweat. December night shifts at Ascension Hospital were always like this: loud, frantic, and never leaving an obstetrician like me a moment to breathe. I just wanted to go home, take a hot shower, and sleep a 6-hour stretch without an alarm when the on-call phone suddenly buzzed. The charge nurse's voice came through the speaker. "Dr. Miller, we have 2 trauma patients incoming. Severe abdominal bleeding, possible miscarriage." I froze for exactly 1 second, then instinctively sprinted toward the emergency department like I always did. But this time, just as the ER doors swung open, I saw the ambulance slide into the driveway. Red lights scanned over tense faces. 2 stretchers were unloaded at once. I took a step forward, and my eyes froze in place. The man on the first stretcher, shirt soaked with rain, a long gash across his forehead pressed with gauze, blood trickling down his temple, was Jackson, my husband. His face was pale, a large bruise blooming on the left side of his head, hair disheveled from the impact. I didn't have time to process what had happened before my eyes landed on the second stretcher. A young woman, black silk dress soaked in blood, both hands clutching her abdomen in painful spasms. Jennifer Davis, my husband's new assistant. She was still conscious, lips tight from the pain, voice trembling. "My baby, please, help my baby." For a very brief moment, I felt my heartbeat drop into the pit of my chest. Every suspicion, every creeping doubt that had lingered in my mind these past 2 months, all of it suddenly snapped together like an icy slap. But my body, trained for over 10 years in this environment, automatically straightened. I put on my mask, pulled on gloves, and stepped between them, voice utterly neutral. "I'm the attending physician. Move both patients to Trauma Bay 3. An ER doctor turned to me and asked, "Dr. Miller, you know the family?" I looked directly at the patient chart in front of me, not sparing Jackson even half a glance. "No, I'm just the attending physician." I took Jennifer's hand, checked her pulse, her blood pressure, ordered immediate IV fluids. She looked at me, eyes wide with panic, as if she couldn't believe the person bent over saving her life was the legal wife of the man whose baby she was carrying. But I replied with one sentence, cold and clinically precise: "I will do my job. Hold still." And as soon as I finished saying "hold still," I drew the curtain closed, adjusted the surgical light, and switched fully into clinical mode. "I am the attending physician. Mr. Miller is a family member of the patient." I stated each word clearly for the nurse to record, my voice so steady that even my own heart couldn't hear the crack inside it. Jennifer was panting, the blood-soaked black dress clinging tightly to her belly, but I did not let emotion seep in, not even a thousandth of a second. I examined her uterus, checked the fetal heart rate, ordered a FAST scan to check for intra-abdominal fluid, and called for a second EV line. I told the resident beside me, "Record exactly, pulse 122, blood pressure 92/58, sharp lower abdominal pain, suspect intrauterine hematoma. Prepare CBC, CMP, coag panel, and stat beta HCG." Everything by the book, nothing extra, nothing missing, not a single step off. I rolled the ultrasound cart closer, applied gel to the probe, working gently enough that no one could accuse me of causing intentional pain. The screen showed a gestational sac contracting abnormally. I adjusted the angle, measured the CRL, measured fetal heart rate, then asked the nurse to prepare tocolytics according to protocol. Everything proceeded rapidly, precisely, to the point that one nurse whispered, Dr. Miller is a machine tonight." I heard it, but didn't react. I just wanted everything so flawless that no one could say I showed favoritism or neglect, especially in a situation where I had the deepest reason to lose objectivity. When the nurse signed off in the electronic medical record, I stepped into the charting room, closed the door, took a long, deep breath, then typed each word onto the screen. Care provided according to protocol, no personal involvement. I read that sentence 3 times to ensure each word was as sharp as a scalpel. But inside me, a very small flame had just been lit. A flame Jennifer should never have ignited. I stepped out of the recovery room, closed the door, and had only taken a few steps when I heard hurried footsteps behind me. "Michelle, wait, please," Jackson called out, his voice hoarse and panicked, like a man chasing the ghost of his own mistakes. I didn't turn around, but he still ran after me, one hand pressing the gauze on his forehead, the other touching lightly at my elbow as if reaching for an anchor. "Michelle, It's not what you think. I can explain. It was an accident. I stopped right in the middle of the hallway, turned to face him. The hospital lighting was so white I could see every dried streak of blood tangled in his hair. I spoke softly, but each word was as sharp as a scalpel. "In here, I'm a doctor. Family matters come later." My voice was so calm that Jackson froze. Maybe he had grown too accustomed to me being gentle, patient, always listening. But tonight, he needed to listen to himself and face the consequences of what he had done. I left him standing in the hallway and walked away as if he was just any other patient's family member. When I reached the hospital entrance, the cold air slapped against my face. I held myself together until I crossed the parking lot, where the yellow streetlights reflected on my car windows. The moment the door closed, the silence inside the car crushed my chest. Everything I had been pushing down suddenly surged up. I cried. Not because I had lost Jackson, but because of the humiliation the two of them created right in the middle of my shift. My hands trembled so much, I had to set my phone on the passenger seat before calling Mia. She answered after exactly 1 ring. "Michelle? What happened?" I couldn't speak for the first few seconds. Only the sound of my choked breathing came through. Mia's tone changed instantly, turning into steel. "Come to my place, now." I drove on autopilot, streetlights flashing by like a film fast-forwarding. When I arrived at Book Tower Apartments, the $2 million penthouse in downtown Detroit, Mia was already at the door, wrapped in a long cardigan, eyes wide as she saw me. The moment she reached me, she pulled me into her arms, holding me tightly as if trying to keep me from collapsing. Affairs always come with a price. The only question is when. I sat down on the cream Minotti sofa Mia adored, my hands still shaking. I told her everything, from the sirens, to the image of Jackson on the stretcher with blood-soaked gauze, to Jennifer's "Why, you?" Every sentence I managed to say, Mia tightened her grip on my shoulder. Not to comfort me, just to keep me upright. When I fell silent, Mia stood up, poured me a glass of water, and said, "All right. If they want a war, we fight with the law." Then she picked up her phone, dialed a familiar number, and said, "I want him here tomorrow. Michelle needs support." I looked at her, confused. Mia gave a thin, cold smile. "Not just support. Michelle, to protect yourself, you need someone who knows how to dig out the truth." She set down her phone, turned to me. "This is William Carter, a detective I've worked with on 2 financial divorce cases. He's good, discreet, and most importantly, he never loses." And for the first time that night, I stopped crying. Not because the pain had disappeared, but because I realized I wouldn't be fighting alone. 2 days later, I was sitting in the on-call room, the neon lights reflecting off the cold steel table. I was reviewing lab results for a few patients when my phone vibrated. "William Carter, incoming call." I answered. William's voice was low, steady, and so precise it felt like each word had been pre-selected. "Dr. Miller, I have the first set of results." I locked the door behind me. "Tell me, William." He didn't waste time. Jennifer Davis had a child when she was in college, but she does not know who the father is. It was the result of a party involving more than 4 men, none of whom took responsibility. I froze, my fingers tightening on the edge of the table. And the child? Noah, William replied. 5 years old, currently living with Jennifer's parents in Grand Rapids. Jennifer sends $5,000 a month for his care, but she has never told anyone at the company she has a child. I leaned back in my chair, feeling as if someone had ripped open a curtain, hiding her entire secret life. William continued, his voice unchanged. 3 years ago, Jennifer applied to work for Jackson's company. Within the first 14 months, she had romantic involvement with 3 men in the office. All of them ended quietly because she demanded privacy. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to stay composed. And she and Jackson, when did that start? About a year ago, when she became Jackson's personal assistant. After that, the number of messages, calls, and one-on-one meetings quadrupled. I heard my own heart beat, no longer breaking, but shifting, from pain to coldness. William paused for a few seconds, then delivered the heaviest part. 9 months ago, Jackson began transferring $12,000 each month to a company under Jennifer's name, Davis Consulting LLC, but the company has no activity, no filing, no legal transactions. It's essentially a pass-through account. I understood immediately. Internal laundering? Exactly. Or concealing marital assets. Both are crimes. For a few seconds, I couldn't hear the air conditioner or the ambulance sirens outside the window. Only my own breathing, slow, heavy, and calmer than I expected. Good, keep digging, I said, my voice flat like water before a storm. Go deeper into the account and find out who else is involved. William answered instantly. I'll send a full report within 48 hours. Prepare yourself. This isn't just infidelity, Michelle. This is an underground financial scheme. I set the phone down, staring at the pair of gloves on the desk. In that moment, I realized some wounds can only be treated with truth. And truth, once unearthed, can never be buried again. I closed my phone, stood up, and washed my hands under cold water, letting my mind settle under the steady stream. The truth about Jennifer's past was only the first layer. I needed the next layer, the one no one could deny, the one science itself would validate. That very morning, when Jennifer was transferred to the special observation room, I walked in with the calm professionalism of a physician. Your condition is more stable, I said, checking her vitals. I want to run a few additional screening tests to ensure the fetus isn't at risk. Jennifer nodded immediately, likely assuming it was routine. She didn't know that among the panel of tests I ordered, I quietly added one more. An expanded NIPT test, the kind that analyzes fetal DNA in the mother's blood and can determine genetic similarity to a presumed father. I handed the order to the nurse and left the room without further explanation. In the medical record, I wrote a vague but medically valid reason. Indication: standard genetic screening due to abdominal trauma. No one questioned it, no one asked. 3 days later, just after finishing a laparoscopic procedure, the lab nurse called me in a low voice. Dr. Miller, your confidential results are ready. Do you want them printed or viewed privately? I wiped sweat from my forehead. Privately, send them to my secure email. I entered an empty conference room and locked the door. The cold air made my hands tremble as I opened my laptop. When the result file appeared, the first line I saw was, paternal match probability, 0%. I didn't breathe for several seconds. Not out of shock, but because everything had finally taken on a shape that could not be denied. The baby inside Jennifer was not Jackson's. What I felt wasn't relief, nor pain. It was a ruthless serenity, like removing a needle that had been embedded in my heart for weeks. I didn't enter the result into her chart. A result like this, at this moment, would only make Jennifer suspicious and compromise everything. I stored the file in my private directory, encrypted it with 2 layers of passwords, then sent a copy to only one person, William Carter. with a single brief line. Follow this lead. 2 minutes later, William called back. Got it. Give me 48 hours. If the baby isn't Jackson's, then there must be someone else. I'll find him. I closed my eyes, leaned back in the chair, letting myself breathe normally again. The truth was finally falling into place, and though I didn't yet know what I would do with it, I knew one thing for certain. This battle was no longer between me and Jennifer. It was expanding into something much larger, something even Jackson never saw coming. 3 days later, I drove alone from Detroit to Ann Arbor for my mother-in-law's birthday. The drive took nearly an hour, and I spent almost half of it preparing myself to keep up the perfect daughter-in-law face that Jackson's family always expected. I maintained the right breathing, the right smile, the same kindness I'd always shown them, not for Jackson, but for my own dignity. When I entered the house, everyone cheered to welcome me. My mother-in-law hugged me tightly, as if everything was still perfect. Jackson stood behind her, the wound on his forehead still visible, though the gauze had been replaced. He walked over, bent down, and kissed my hair. A gesture so sweet, the entire family let out a chorus of delighted awes. To anyone looking in, we must have looked like a couple who had just fallen in love all over again. But as I sat beside him, it felt like sitting next to a stranger, a man I was quietly waiting on to see what else he might be hiding. Dishes were brought out, conversation buzzed cheerfully. I nodded, smiled on cue, responded gently, never once deviating from the serene image I had crafted through 7 years of marriage into this family. But inside, my chest was so tight every breath felt like an effort. Just as the first glass of red wine was poured, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I glanced down discreetly beneath the table, opened the screen. Email from William Carter. Subject: You need to see this. Now. I opened it, and in that moment, the room fell silent in my mind, even as laughter still echoed around me. The first line of the email contained just 2 words. It's worse. I scrolled down, dozens of files attached, videos, images, bank receipts. William wrote, Jennifer slept with 3 men, Daniel, Michael, Mason, in the same night at a cabin in Lake St. Clair. 8 weeks later, she met each of them at the same cafe and demanded $25,000 from each to stay quiet. All cafe cameras recorded everything. She even sent blurry video clips from the cabin to Daniel as blackmail. My eyes locked on the clip William had attached. Jennifer, in a hoodie, sitting across from Michael in the cafe, her hand pushing her phone toward him, saying something the camera couldn't pick up. But Michael's panicked expression said enough. $25,000 to cover up a reckless night. My fingers tightened around my wine glass so hard my wrist trembled. I had to set it down immediately, afraid I'd drop it. My heart pounded like a hammer in my chest. I looked up, forced a polite smile as my mother-in-law asked if I wanted more salad. I answered, Yes, Mom, I'll get some. In a voice so gentle, no one could tell my hands were trembling under the table, clasped tightly together. Only I knew. Only I understood. And only I sat there, in the middle of a seemingly peaceful family, while the filthiest truth burned quietly in the palm of my hand. When the party ended, I hugged my mother-in-law and said goodbye to everyone with the gentle smile they were all familiar with. But the moment I stepped outside, that smile fell from my face like a mask I no longer needed to wear. I reopened my phone and reviewed every file William had sent, every clip, every piece of evidence, every bank transfer, and I knew I couldn't let this fade into the gray. That night, when I returned home, something unusual happened. Jackson didn't come back. It had been 2 consecutive nights of him saying he was staying at the office to deal with the accident fallout. But after what William discovered, the sleeping at the office story sounded faker than a cheap soap opera. I opened my laptop, logged into our shared financial portal, the account we used for investments and property purchases, and sure enough, buried in recent transactions was a name I had never heard before. Maple Ridge Residence, Unit 5B, just 4 blocks from Jackson's office. I opened the ownership record. I froze. Owner, Jackson Miller and Michelle Miller. Status, marital joint property. Current resident, Jennifer Davis. It took me exactly 3 seconds to connect the dots. Jackson didn't just cheat. He moved Jennifer into a property jointly owned by the two of us, hiding assets and misusing marital property, an act Michigan law considers a severe violation in divorce and asset division cases. My blood ran cold, like it had been drained straight from my chest. I called my attorney immediately, Helena Brooks, a specialist in divorce and marital assets. I said only one sentence. Send a notice to vacate to Jennifer Davis, Maple Ridge, 5B. Helena understood the gravity at once. 1 hour later, I received the scan. A formal notice demanding Jennifer vacate the marital property within 7 days, per Michigan Statute 552.401. The next morning, Jackson called me, voice frantic. Michelle, what did you do? Jennifer can't just move out. I stared at the phone screen, feeling a strange peace settle over me. You can explain that to the court, I replied, then hung up. Jackson didn't realize, or wasn't quick enough to hide, that refusing to comply with a marital asset vacancy notice was perfect evidence of willfully concealing assets during marriage. And in that very moment, I realized, the more Jackson tried to protect Jennifer, the more he was single-handedly destroying everything he owned. And ironically, the very next day, I was the one summoned to Jennifer's room for her routine fetal checkup, the job she shamelessly requested I continue from the beginning. I entered the room with a completely blank expression, pulled on fresh gloves, opened her digital chart, and began the exam. I did my duty: fetal heartbeat check, ultrasound, kidney function assessment, checking for edema, protein levels in her urine. Professionally, I allowed no margin for error. Personally, I no longer allowed myself to feel anything. You should limit spicy, salty, and oily foods. With your history of kidney stones, you're in a high-risk group, I said clearly during her third checkup since the accident. Jennifer nodded vaguely, fingers twirling her hair, eyes glued to her phone. Jackson stood beside her, throwing me a look half defiant, half irritated. I continued, explaining, if you don't adjust your diet, the risk of kidney stone recurrence during pregnancy is very high. A recurrence in the second trimester can... Jackson interrupted sharply. Are you trying to punish her, Michelle? I looked at him, blinked once, slowly. The kind of blink doctors use when dealing with uninformed patients and unreasonable relatives. I'm offering medical advice, not personal opinions. He let out a short, mocking laugh. Yeah, of course. Since when do you care about her health so much? I know you're angry, but don't drag your profession into this. I didn't respond. Any reply would risk the strategic advantage I held, and I would never let a cheater drag me down to his level. I opened the chart and documented exactly what needed to be recorded. No omissions, no euphemisms, no softening. High risk due to kidney stone history. Will monitor closely. I deliberately bolded high risk because I knew one thing: medical records are legal evidence, and legal evidence cannot be erased. Jennifer didn't care. Jackson recklessly ignored every warning. The two of them kept eating whatever they liked: fried food, soda, spicy and salty dishes, as if her uterus wasn't carrying a developing life. A week later, I saw Jennifer walk into the clinic with a fast food bag in hand, Jackson beside her, laughing like nothing mattered, unaware that every one of their careless decisions was chipping away at the fragile future of the child she carried. And in that moment, I understood. I wasn't proving I was a good doctor. They were proving they were completely unworthy of the advice I gave. But medical life is always fair in the cruelest way. It doesn't run on emotions, only on consequences. 2 months later, on a snowy Tuesday morning, Jennifer was wheeled into the ER, pale as a sheet, clutching her right side, drenched in sweat. She groaned with every breath, her body convulsing in sharp waves of pain. Acute kidney stones. One glance was all it took. I knew the stone had moved, blocking the ureter and endangering both mother and fetus. The first thing I did was order an immediate ultrasound, blood tests, and pulled up her previous records. I had warned them, word for word. When the results came in, I spoke calmly. We need a minimally invasive procedure. Now, it's the safest option for both you and the baby. But Jackson, with the kind of confident ignorance I knew too well, stepped forward and cut me off. No, I'm not letting her get surgery. We're going to a private clinic someone recommended. They have a cheaper option. Cheaper. He was talking about the life of a pregnant woman and an unborn child, with the benchmark of cheaper. I stayed calm, explained slowly and clearly, in terms anyone without medical training could understand. Private clinics don't have fetal monitoring systems. The risk of infection is high. If there's a delay, she could. Jackson interrupted again. Michelle, you don't need to tell people how to live their lives. This is our family's decision. She doesn't trust you. I looked at Jennifer. She was in so much pain her lips had turned blue, but still nodded weakly in agreement with Jackson like a programmed doll. And so, they signed the release form for full personal liability, then walked out of the hospital in their expensive SUV, like they were going shopping, not running away from a medical emergency. I knew what was coming would be terrible, but as a doctor, I couldn't stop people who chose to walk straight into their mistakes. 3 days later, while I was doing morning prenatal rounds, the ER called. Dr. Miller, we have a returning patient. Pregnant, high fever, low blood pressure, possible septic shock. I rushed downstairs. Jennifer lay on the stretcher, shivering uncontrollably, lips cracked and bleeding, eyes dull. The fourth site was infected, her side swollen and red, pulse weak as a thread. Jackson ran beside her, panicked, the gauze on his forehead gone without him realizing it. Michelle, please, you have to save her. They said antibiotics would be enough. They said. I didn't look at him. I looked only at Jennifer, and with one glance, I knew. A few more minutes, and neither mother nor child would survive. Get her to the OR now, I shouted, for the first time in years, letting my voice rise beyond what was normal for an OBGYN. I scrubbed in, changed into sterile gear, and gripped the scalpel with a kind of focus I reserved only for the riskiest surgeries. The monitor beeped urgently. Nurses called out dropping vitals. Jackson sobbed outside the OR. I heard none of it, only the slowing fetal heartbeat on the screen and the sensation of time running in reverse. With every ounce of skill I had, I made the right incision, drained the pus, irrigated the abdomen, controlled the infection, stabilized circulation, and ultimately kept the baby safe inside the womb. When the surgery ended, the entire OR exhaled in unison. Jennifer survived. The baby survived. I removed my gloves, bowed my head for a second, not from exhaustion, but from the weight of fighting to save 2 lives, one of whom had willfully tried to destroy mine. And outside the OR, Jackson stood there, pale as ash, staring at me as if he'd just seen something he never imagined, that I could save everyone, except the marriage he had already killed. But that night, I didn't have time to think of Jackson or Jennifer as the people who betrayed me. In front of me were only a patient and a small life fighting to survive. Less than 40 minutes after the infected surgery ended, the fetus's condition began to deteriorate. Heart rate dropped, uterine contractions became erratic, oxygen levels fluctuated. I looked at the monitor, at Jennifer's belly, then at the team around me. We need to deliver, now. No one objected. No one questioned me. I made the final call. The emergency delivery at 32 weeks lasted nearly 4 hours, a stretch of time that felt both like an eternity and a single breath. I held my incision steady, ordered max steroid infusion for fetal lungs, fought for every second as Jennifer's blood pressure crashed, stabilized, then crashed again. The entire OR was silent, only the machines echoing off the white walls. When I pulled the baby boy from the womb, his body was blue, weighing under 2 kilos, lungs still underdeveloped, breathing barely a whisper. But he lived. He moved. He gave the faintest sign of life into my hand. One nurse wept. Another exhaled so deeply her shoulders collapsed. As for me, I simply lowered my hand to my chest, feeling my own heartbeat synced with my profession. Steady, precise, unmoved. As the baby was transferred to the NICU, I returned to close Jennifer's surgical site, checking final fluid loss and drug response. My entire body ached, my neck strained like it was being pulled, but my heart was strangely calm. I had done what was right. I had given everything. Not for Jackson, not for Jennifer, but for an innocent child who never chose the circumstances of his birth. When Jennifer woke from anesthesia, tears streamed down her pale cheeks. She looked at me. No arrogance, no challenge, no triumph left. Only the raw fear of a mother who nearly lost her child. Her voice broke, jagged and fragmented. "Thank you. I'm sorry." I didn't say, "It's okay." I didn't say, "I forgive you." I just nodded. Enough for her to know her apology was heard, but not enough to erase what had happened. And as I walked out of the recovery room and closed the door behind me, I knew this one thing for certain. From this moment on, the spiral of consequences Jackson and Jennifer had set in motion would no longer affect just me. It would consume their lives as well. My eyes were still stinging from the operating room lights as I stepped into the postnatal room, where Jennifer was resting after delivery and the baby boy was being monitored in the NICU. The room was so quiet you could hear the IV drip falling steadily. But that silence didn't last a full minute. The door burst open. Jackson walked in, his face drawn from 3 sleepless days in the hospital hallway, but his eyes held something I had never seen before. Shameless confidence. "Michelle," he said, standing upright, voice tight like a pulled string. "I want to talk about custody. I'm the baby's father. I have legal rights." I looked at him, feeling like I was watching a stranger audition for a role he never belonged to. He really believed that. Or maybe he just needed to. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a white envelope stamped by the hospital's lab, an envelope I had kept since the birth. I placed it in Jackson's hand, my voice calm, as if I were discussing the weather. "Read it. This is the postnatal DNA result." Jackson tore it open immediately, his eyes scanning the first line. And in that instant, I watched the confidence in him disintegrate into ash. His lips parted, but made no sound. His hands shook so violently, the paper nearly slipped to the floor. He read it again, this time out loud. "Paternal match, 0%. 0? That's not possible. That's not possible." I said nothing. I had spoken enough over the past months, through action, warnings, and a silence that carried more meaning than words ever could. Jackson stammered, voice shrill. "Then, who's the father?" I glanced up at the clock on the wall. Right then, the door opened again. Mason, Jackson's best friend of 15 years, stepped in. He froze, hands covering his mouth as he saw Jennifer on the bed and heard the baby crying faintly from the NICU. I had been the one to message Mason. I had sent him a separate copy of the secondary DNA report, the one that listed the biological father. And Mason knew. He knew, but he came to confirm it with his own eyes. Mason stepped forward, eyes red as the baby's cries echoed down the corridor. "Where's the baby? My baby! I want to see him!" Jackson screamed, lunging to block Mason. "You betrayed me! You slept with Jennifer behind my back!" Mason didn't dodge, didn't lie. He just looked at Jackson, eyes full of despair, confusion, and the guilt he could no longer hide. "I didn't betray you. I didn't know. Jennifer told me the baby was mine. I had no reason to doubt her." The room exploded in silence. Jennifer broke down, shoulders shaking violently. Jackson stood there, eyes bloodshot, mouth open, but unable to make a sound. In that moment, I saw everything clearly under the fluorescent light. Jackson lost his wife. Jackson lost his best friend. Jackson lost the one illusion he'd clung to for months, that Jennifer was carrying his child. As he collapsed into a chair, face buried in his hands, I felt only one thing. This wasn't my victory. This was his consequence, delivered at the precise moment when I had no choice left but the truth. And that consequence didn't end in the hospital room. It followed me straight to the Wayne County Family Court, where I placed a thick file on the judge's desk, unshaken, without hesitation, with not a single tear left for a man who no longer deserved them. In my divorce filing, I included everything necessary to expose what Jackson had done. Illegally transferring $12,000 per month into a shell company under Jennifer's name. Hiding marital assets by moving his mistress into Maple Ridge 5B, property jointly owned by both of us. Financially supporting a fake company, violating Michigan's marital transparency laws. I remember the judge's eyes as she flipped to page 18. She looked up over her glasses, first at me, then at Jackson, who sat frozen like a statue, fists clenched. "Mr. Miller," she said slowly, clearly, "your actions not only breach marital obligations, but also violate asset division laws. Mrs. Michelle Miller has the legal right to claim division in favor of the injured party." Jackson opened his mouth to speak, but his lawyer placed a hand on his shoulder. A silent warning. The more he spoke, the more damage he would do. And just after 3 short hearings, the ruling came, so swiftly that many hadn't yet grasped the gravity of Jackson's misconduct. I was granted full ownership of the condo, all marital assets, and every jointly held investment. No 50-50 split, no negotiation, no compromise. Everything that had been built on my labor, 36-hour shifts, emergency surgeries, years of carrying the family income, was returned to the one who truly earned it. Jackson stood in the courthouse hallway, hands hanging by his sides, face drained of all color. No home, no family, no honor, and no best friend, because Mason was now in the NICU, cradling the baby who wasn't Jackson's. On the day the court closed the file, Jackson packed his few remaining belongings and left the condo, the one he had once brought his mistress into. He moved back in with his parents in Ann Arbor, into the same teenage bedroom he'd left at 18 to make it on his own. As for me, when I closed the door behind him one last time, I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel vengeance. I felt right. Right because justice, this time, stood with the one who never lied. Right because I didn't let anyone trample my self-worth without consequence. And right because this was the only way to begin a new chapter, a chapter where the name Jackson Miller would appear on not a single page, but not everyone in this story walked out of the wreckage with pride. Some had to crawl, dragging themselves out with all the shame and bitterness they'd created. 3 weeks after the divorce ruling, word of Jennifer's role in the financial scandal spread through Jackson's company faster than the Detroit winter wind. Her use of a shell business, internal blackmail, and the ensuing scandal left the executives with no cover left to offer. She was fired during the Monday morning meeting. 3 hours later, the news had leaked online. An online massacre began. Hundreds of comments, shares, and mocking hashtags exploded everywhere. People dug through Jennifer's Instagram, scrutinized her baby bump, dissected every word she'd ever posted. She became the poster child for the mistress who destroyed her best friend's family. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel satisfaction. I just saw it as the storm she had summoned herself. That afternoon, as I stepped out of the NICU after my shift, I saw a familiar figure down the hallway, small shoulders shaking, hands clutching a coat. Jennifer. Her face was pale, eyes swollen from crying, but she stood upright when she saw me. "Michelle, do you have a minute?" Her voice was so small it sounded like a child's, not a grown woman's. I nodded. She took a deep breath, then stood right in front of me, tears falling too fast to wipe away. "You saved me and my baby, from beginning to end. I don't deserve forgiveness. I know that, but..." She grabbed my hand, shoulders trembling with sobs. "You saved us. I owe you my life." For a moment, I didn't see the woman who wrecked my marriage. I saw a patient, a mother, someone who had come back from the brink of death. And in all my years as an OB/GYN, one thing I had learned was this. Some wounds don't need forgiveness to finally close. I gently pulled my hand away, not cold, but not tender either. Raise your child well, I said, steady but not vindictive. That's the only way to repay your debt to life. Jennifer nodded, tears soaking her collar, then stepped back and bowed deeply. No excuses, no blame, no plea for me to salvage her reputation. Just the acceptance of a new beginning, from below zero. I watched her walk down the long hospital corridor, small and lost in the cold yellow light. And for the first time since all this began, I thought, maybe Jennifer truly would change. Not for love, not for Jackson, but for the child who had just been born, the only one in this story who bore no blame. And from that moment on, I knew every person in this story would now walk the path they paved with their own choices. As for me, I chose the path with no looking back. That afternoon, after finishing my early shift, I drove toward Lake Michigan, where the water stretched to the horizon like a vast mirror reflecting every memory I was ready to let go of. The coastal road opened up before me, wide and clear, as if no one had ever hurt me in this life. I rolled down the windows. The wind from the lake rushed in, tangling in my hair, wrapping around my neck like an embrace of freedom. For the first time in months, I felt air truly reach my lungs. I parked by the overlook, turned off the engine. Stepping out, I faced the deep blue water, my feet planted firmly on the earth, as if I were marking a new point in my life. The waves lapped gently, as if answering a sorrow I hadn't yet named. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and spoke to myself, soft as a vow, sharp as a final cut to the last thread that bound me. Some people can forgive cheating. I'm not one of them. If this story touched you, click like to let YouTube know you want to hear more. Don't forget to subscribe and share this video with anyone who needs a reminder. You deserve truth, respect, and a new life. Thank you for being here with me.